Welcome to the State of the Nation Weekly Update with me, Mike Sham. You know, South Africa, we are quite good at learning certain lessons and not so good at learning others. I want to talk about a lesson that we did learn. We learned a wonderful lesson from Bell Pottinger. Do you remember them? Those were the people, the PR people in London that the Guptas used to change the conversation in South Africa, to try and sanitize the theft that went on in the Zuma presidency. And the best way to achieve it, they did it purely by public relations. And one of the things that they did was they perverted language. What they did is, they said up was down and down was up, and everybody thought this was great. They just used certain catchy terms and they stuck. Radical economic transformation, white monopoly capital, that was all Bell Pottinger talking points that have stuck. Well, we've got a new term that has stuck in South Africa, and that is there's a grouping of political parties that are not in the government of national unity that frame themselves as the Progressive Caucus. Now, Progressive Caucus, what comes to mind is people that really want to make the world a better place, modern, up to date, with it, progressive, man. We want to move forward. Well, it turns out that the Progressive Caucus is much like a Bell Pottinger slogan. It's the opposite of what people think it is, right? And I want to do a bit of a deep dive because this idea of the Progressive Caucus is yet another South African grift, a group of people that just really want to get their hands on the money. So let's talk about who is in the Progressive Caucus. Well, as I said, these are parties that are not part of the government of national unity, and they did manage to get some representation in parliament. Well, we know that Cyril Ramaphosa, in his absolute bid to make the coalition between the ANC and the DA not look like a coalition between the ANC and the DA, called it a government of national unity. Well, I'm ambivalent on this, whether you call it one or the other. Really, it's a coalition. One party's got 40%, the other got 20%, and the rest don't make up the 10% that the ANC would be missing. So quite clearly it is what it is. But the parties that were left out of those discussions were Mkhonto weSizwe, that did really well, getting more than 14.5% at the last election, and the EFF that didn't do as well as what they hoped. They got just below 10%. But together, 23%, they definitely could have formed a coalition with the ANC. The only thing that stopped that from happening was the fact that one of their preconditions was that the ANC had to get rid of their president, which is always a big ask, to tell somebody that they have to get rid of their leader in order for you to deal with them. Cyril Ramaphosa jumped all over that and used that as the line to kill those discussions and jump into bed with the Democratic Alliance. And of course, there's been no end to the wailing and gnashing of teeth ever since that partnership was formed, because there's some parties in their government of national unity that do not sit well with certain South Africans. They don't want to see the Democratic Alliance anywhere near power. They don't want to see the Freedom Front Plus anywhere near power. They are sort of iffy on IFP. Sometimes they like them, sometimes they hate them. Patriotic Alliance as well, although they're pretty happy in Gauteng to deal with them in cities like Johannesburg and so on. But the remnants of what is now the Progressive Caucus is made up of Mkhonto weSizwe, Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF, the African Transformation Movement, whose leader, Vuya Zingula, was on the State of the Nation this week, and the United Africans Transformation, which I think has one seat or so. Initially, there were some other, entrepreneurial parties that were part of the Progressive Alliance, Bantu Alamisa and his UDM, Al Jamar, who always seem to be out there for a freebie. PAC, yes, they do still exist. They've got one seat. And they were originally part of this Progressive Caucus, but smelt the money in the GNU and off they went. So this boat is being rowed very hard, this Progressive Caucus. The idea being they progress. Well, let's look at what they stand for, and you can decide just how progressive they are. They are out to advance radical economic transformation. Heard that before somewhere. And land appropriation without compensation. We've heard this before, right? Basically, the government owns all property rights, which means that neither you nor me can own land, because the only way you can have expropriation without compensation is to suspend property rights. So this is their big thing. And they have made it publicly known that really what is progressive about them isn't really their policies, but the fact that to them, the government of national unity makes no sense. Why? Because apparently the problem is that philosophically and politically, some of the parties in the government of national unity do not align, they don't agree on certain things, and this is a deal breaker. So let's give you a for instance. The ANC, in an attempt to get votes, rushed through the national health insurance, knowing that the Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, IFP are vehemently opposed to the NHI. Why? Because it's not a very well thought out piece of legislation. The country's healthcare system is in a mess because it's corrupt. Remember, we've got this massive public healthcare system that is badly run by the state, and a well-run, very expensive private healthcare system run by the private sector that is very good. What they said, or what they're still trying to say, is put the two together and they'll become like the private healthcare sector. Well, that's the most ridiculous thing ever. That is to say that the tail is more important than the dog. But anyway, the ANC tried to get that kind of legislation through. They did the same thing with the Bella Act, which they knew was going to antagonize minorities. Why? Because it took choice away from parents with regards to schooling of their children and gave that power to provincial premiers. And we know where the rubber hits the road. It hits the road here in Gauteng, where we've got a provincial premier who can't stop spaza shop owners from poisoning children, but if there's a hint of racism in a white school, he's there, he's contracting lawyers, he's doing investigations, he's doing everything. Maybe what we should have done was told Panyaza Lesufi that it was white people that were poisoning the children, and he would have had an investigation done immediately. But hey, that's just a thought. Let's talk about the Progressive Caucus and what their policies look like to me. Well, for starters, fewer freedoms. These are anti-constitutionalists. These are parties that want to get rid of the Constitution. Mkhonto Wesizwe has been very vocal in saying that what they want is a return to a parliamentary democracy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a parliamentary democracy is what South Africa had in the past. The National Party ruled in a parliamentary democracy, which meant that whatever Parliament said, regardless of how stupid it is, it could be passed by a simple majority. In other words, if 50% plus one of that Parliament said, you know what, let's deny blacks their rights, it became law. You couldn't challenge it. You couldn't say, oh no, there's a Bill of Rights that stops that kind of bad legislation, or there are civil liberties that we would be transgressing. No, Parliament says yes, therefore it's yes. That's what they want. So please understand, hardly progressive, in fact, very regressive. Right? What else do they want? They want greater power for royal families. South Africa sustains itself. In other words, we can produce enough food to keep all 60 million of us fed. Well, that's because we have industrial agriculture. We've got a choice. We can either have industrial agriculture or we can have royalty running farmlands. We can't have both. Either we keep a modern agriculture sector or we go back to the way the world looked in 1800 when there were 1/10 of the number of people on this planet and we were all subsistence farmers. This is hardly progressive. This is a step going way back in the other direction. South Africa is an agricultural exporter. Why? Because we do agriculture on an industrial scale. They don't want that. I've mentioned the property rights. Take away property rights and you do not have business. Because my idea isn't my idea. This camera that I'm looking into does not belong to me. It belongs to the state. And at any point, I cannot claim property over this because there are no such thing as property rights. So that doesn't sound very progressive either. But why are they so fervent in their belief that this should become part of the South African landscape? Why should we have the so-called Progressive Caucus, progressive policies? The answer is all around us. The answer is currently in Mozambique, playing out there. The answer is in Zimbabwe. If you have these policies, the only people that benefit out of it are politicians. Because if you've got a situation where the center, the leadership, decides who's going to get that nice big house in Sandton, or who's going to get that lousy house in Karoo, who's going to get that lush farm in Mokhuba's Kloof, and who has to farm in the Karoo, you want to be that guy making the decision. Or even better, you want to be related to that guy making the decision. And that guy then has power. He can do whatever he likes. He can give mining rights to whoever he likes. He can take mining rights away from whoever he does not like. It becomes a source of power. And nothing is better than if you can craft your way to getting a piece of legislation like this away. You become rich on a global scale. This is what the Progressive Caucus is after. They are not after making South Africa a better place. They're not after fairness. They are after enriching themselves, and we've got to understand this is the opposite of progress. Who loses? Well, the losers, once again, are fairly obvious. Because, as always, look around us. The losers here are not the people who are going to end up with all of the power. They're going to be just fine. It's not going to be the rich people, because the rich people are just going to leave the country or play along with the people who have power. You know, you've got options when you're rich and educated. You can pretty much do what you like. So they're not going to lose out of this. The losers are going to be the millions of poor people in this country that will be forced, like some of our compatriots from Mozambique and Lesotho, be forced to go down disused mine shafts, dig away at the pillars, to try and get an ounce of gold to feed your family. Or they're going to have to get onto rafts, take on the ocean, to try and get to countries where some of this crazy legislation isn't part of those countries, to try and eke out a living in other countries that haven't gone this route. So I think we've got to be very, very careful about even calling it a Progressive Caucus. I've got a pile of books here that have been written about many of those members of this Progressive Caucus and what they did to this country already. It's here. It's here. I'm not making it up. I'm not like Matthew Sporzo, who didn't see it coming. No. We know what they did. It's in black and white. It came out in the Zondo Commission. And these are the very same people that are telling you to relinquish their rights because they stand for progress. I'm here to tell you that they stand for anything but progress. They are trying to turn South Africa into a third world country because third world countries are easy for leaders to plunder. So, understand what they're all about. Please, if you don't agree with me, I'm sure you will be more than happy to put that in the comments, and I will always try my best to reply to those comments. But in the meantime, support our sponsors, Pace Car Rental, and keep on watching The State of the Nation, where we give you the unfiltered news and views, and we hold people to account. Because that's another part of the Progressive Caucus that is not going to last. Boy, they're not going to want people asking difficult questions. The choice is up to us. Thank you for joining me.